So good evening, Chiwempala. Good evening, Zambia. Good evening, world. TVBAKWETU here. Elias Munsha coming to you live from Calgary, Alberta. But of course, we have a very special guest today, Maureen Nkandu. Maureen Nkandu, she's going to share with us a little bit about her story and everything else. And nothing would have worked here. No other song would have been appropriate for this occasion than the Serenje Kalindula, Eloyadila. And so I want you to share with as many people as possible because Maureen Nkandu is on TVBAKWETU today and we are going to have a great time. So that's Eloyadila from Serenje.
Araba mushaka mwachimona amashambesha bano ndanamusowera
Wala ya mona obviously.
awe mwala yabakusowera
you. Thank you very much for having joined us. That was Serenje Kalindula. And the reason why we were playing it deliberately is because that's Maureen Nkandu's favorite Kalindula band, Serenje Banjo Kalindula. I think that's what they used to be called. Welcome to our program today, Maureen.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be on this show. I know you've been trying to get me on for some time, but obviously a lot of things have been happening. I'm very happy to be here. It's nice to be back on TV. And you're doing a very good job. And, you know, that song just got me started very nicely. It's making me miss Kukanona.
Kukanona, where is that?
Kanona is in Serenje, so it is an area in the Serenje district. It's about 1 hour's drive from Paserenje Boma. And right in the center, it's just about, let's say, 40 or so kilometers away from the DRC border. And perhaps that's how I'll describe it, but it's one central part of the Serenje district. That is by the railway station.
I think it makes sense now that you've mentioned Katanga, DRC, because all of us Pedico people, Abaushi, Abalala, Abalamba, Abaswaka, we are our culture is very close to Katanga, and so that makes it for.
That's right, because we hail from the Luba-Lunda empires, you might know, but most of us predominantly from the Luba side of that empire. So, and we have actually family, we have relatives across the border in Serenje. You know, these borders are all they're very superficial. They were created by the colonialists. So without all those borders, we would not have had Katanga and Zambia and Zaire and whatever else you call it. We are one and the same people, essentially.
So could we say that the musical genius of Awabe Serenje Kalindula is, comes from Katanga, comes from the Luba-Lunda Empire and all that?
I think I wouldn't say that. Africans are generally very musical people. I mean, it comes in all sorts of variants, but this is very typical of a Kalindula Kabalala Serenje. But Serenje, actually, Wisdom Destroyer Nkandu, the genius behind the Serenje Kalindula band is my cousin. And, that's the sort of typical music that came down generations from what they used to call Kusandawni. Sundown essentially is just the colloquial word for sundown. So what would happen is villagers would go out to go and have a bit of fun, and they would spend most of the night there, the evening there, and until the sunshine went down, until there wasn't, I don't know what to call it, but anyway, essentially until the sun went down. So that's where the word sundown came down. So they would go and party all night long until the sun set, and hence the phrase sundown. So that sort of music then evolved, and then there were instruments around it and modernized it in some ways. I also like other modern Zambian music, but I particularly like the Serenje Kalindula band because they did some very interesting social commentary in some of their music years ago when they were very popular. Unfortunately, as you know, the entire band died. There's only one person surviving, and that's the founder of the band.
All right. So who is the founder? Is it Wisdom Destroyer?
Wisdom Destroyer Nkandu, that's right. He's trying to regroup. It's a bit of a challenge. Yes, he stays in Luansha. I'm in touch with him quite frequently. Yeah, he's based in Luansha. I think you should meet him one day. He's got a very interesting story to tell.
Yeah, that would be good, because even the musical group itself, it evolves, right? And so Maureen, that's why we have all these questions. Is the culture giving music or informing music, right? Or is the music actually creating the culture and informing the culture? Because the Serenje Banjo Kalindula band itself, it evolves from the early songs that they are doing, the early instruments that they are depending on, to where now Wisdom Destroyer Nkandu and Chisenga, is it Chisenga, whatever they are, they create very different sounds.
Yes, but as you know, because the entire band died in a car accident, they're not playing any music at the moment, and is trying to regroup. But yes, it's both ways. Music is creating the culture is creating the music. I think essentially what's happening is that there's a very strong identity, national identity within Zambia of late, with us playing a lot of our own music. So if you look at our history and how music has evolved, and honestly, I'm not here to talk about music because I'm not an expert at that, but this is just my observation, is that from the time of the colonial period in the 60s, we had the big bands like the Big Gold Six Band, and later on in the 70s, Nasho Pichen Kazembe, and can't remember who the other one was. I was quite young. And then we had The Witch. And we had, yes, he, of course, such an important figure. And then, of course, then there was that gravitation towards a bit of amalgamation of local and Western music with Bene Jagarichand and others, very good guitarists, Pongozi. And there was this generation in the 70s to early 80s that played very good, brilliant Zambian music and a lot of social commentary around it. And then on the other side, there was also the espousing of Western music by the younger generation, as teenagers, the days of the disco. And so there was that dichotomy, but also remembering that across the border, Rumba was becoming very big with Franco and Tabule and Joskiki and Bukuta. And I'm telling you, music experts are going to think I'm talking a lot of gibberish, but this is just my interpretation. So we've seen, and then now of late, we're seeing young people coming up with a different genre of music, but most of it localized and based on local issues. So people like Wisdom Destroyer Nkandu, who played that type of Kanindola back then, have got quite a difficult time catching up and fitting in and matching the competition that we have these days from the younger generation.
We hope we can bring him. But one of the distinctives that I notice for the Lala people is that it's some sort of a pride that is very distinct. Even in the music itself, the Serenje Banjo Kalindola music, you can pick it up, right? The self-praise.
Yes.
It's very interesting. Do you experience it? Have you noticed it about yourself?
No, not really. I think Lalas are very humble people. Generally, yes, we are, and very respectful. I mean, we even respect dogs. We say Bambwa. You would say Wembwa, when we say Bambwa to Abapela Kumchishi, we say Balunshi, Bapushi, Bamunsha. There's a lot of respect in that, and there's a lot of humility, and that comes across when in the language that we speak. Murisha Nibama. Even if I'm greeting, let's say your daughter, I wouldn't say Odishani Mukashana, of course that is more city parlance, but I would say something like Bama Mutende, Mwashimukeni Bama, Vata. So there's that. I joked once when I commented on one of your posts, I said in Lala, we can even insult you respectfully and you kneel down and say, nah, don't tell them why. Because, so the self-praise aspect isn't that, I wouldn't say so, and perhaps maybe because I'm Lala, but also I'm partly Tumbuka because my mother was Tumbuka. But it's just essentially being very proud of our language, our culture, our tradition, and our heritage, and that manifesting in the music and in the manner in which we speak and in the manner in which we conduct ourselves.
It's one of the distinctive lyric that the Serenje Banjo Kalindula use. Anyway, apart from the music of Serenje, let us know a little bit about you. Who are you?
Well, that's always a very difficult question. And, well, who am I? I am a journalist. I always sometimes you don't want to describe yourself by your profession. But the reason I call myself a journalist is because I've always argued, and my late father, who was also a journalist, always said, being a journalist is not a profession. It's a way of life. It's a way of life because you live it. Everything around you is journalistic in that sense. And that's who I am. I was a journalist, I think maybe genetically, if there ever was such a thing, but from a very early age, because I was inspired by a very strong person, was my father. I'm one among many children born of my parents. Both my mother and father were married before and came into their marriage with other children, but I'm the firstborn between the two of them. Amongst the few surviving. Born and bred in Lusaka. I started my education outside Zambia in Nairobi. It's actually the first country I went to many, many years ago. I won't say how long ago, but it was in the early 70s.
Did you say many, or you should have just ended at many years ago? Why the many?
Maybe, many years ago, if you want it that way. So I started my education there, basic education, and then came back to Zambia and went to primary school at Northmead Primary School, briefly at Woodlands Primary School. And then my mom was keen on me going to a girls-only school because I was bullied quite a lot by the boys. They didn't bully me because I was a weakling. They bullied me because I was quite smart in class. And they would always say to me, okay, chef, you pasa number one, closing day tukakuma, that sort of thing. But it's essentially, but seriously, they prefer that I go to a girls' school. And I went to the Lusaka Girls Primary School, which was actually a very profound moment for me because it is there that I actually rose to, maybe we call it fame, but rose to my public speaking life. I wrote a speech. I'm a trained speechwriter, but as a child, 12-year-old, I wrote a speech on behalf of all Commonwealth children about the issues of what was happening in the Southern African region at that time. As you know, that was in the late 1970s. There were, liberation struggles. It was just a few years after the Soweto uprising in South Africa, Namibia, then the Southwest Africa. It was called SWAPO. Anyway, Southwest Africa was still colonized partly by the Germans and the South Africans. Mozambique and Angola had just gained independence, Zimbabwe under Ian Smith. So there were a lot of issues happening, and I was politicized at an early age. I took an interest in some of those aspects as a child because I used to observe what my parents did. And so I wrote a speech which was selected, and that year was the International Year of the Child. Which also coincided with the Commonwealth's Heads of State Summit, which took place in Lusaka. And because of that, by virtue of my speech being chosen, it was suggested that Queen Elizabeth and other visiting delegates, former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, government officials in Zambia and others, visit the school and listen to my speech, which I presented quite eloquently because I owned it. And therein started my public speaking life. I did say to the Queen then that I wanted to be a broadcaster, and she said, well, you will be. And that encouraged me, as did, my peers, my classmates, my teachers and others. So essentially, who am I? I'm a journalist. I've evolved over the years. Having done a lot of journalism, I also, developed a passion for development issues. Reported a lot about economics, social aspects, civil war and conflict. And that drew me then to work for organizations like the United Nations, the World Bank, the African Union. So there's a combination of journalism and a lot of communications. I've worked as a communications expert, a spin doctor, public relations, crisis communications, and then also gravitated into taking a lot of interest in international relations. So that's been the evolution of my personality and my career. I'm also a mother and I'm a wife.
Right. Now, when you say that you felt like you were politicized very early, were your parents in politics, or this was just interest in reading, interest in current affairs and all that?
It was a mixture of both. My dad was a freedom fighter, and he went to jail several times because of, he was among those that branched off from the African National Congress to join Dr. Kaunda in forming UNIP, and later gravitated towards the UPP of Simon Mwansaka-Pwepwe. And so he had quite a challenging political time, but he was also a journalist. And obviously as a journalist, you take a lot of interest in political issues, be they local and or international. I was very close to my father, and by that I mean that every evening he would listen to the news. He had this short, what did you call it, shortwave 2-band radio, that he would listen to the news passionately. He would listen to the local news, and then he would tune into Radio RSA, that time, which was the South African racist South African government propaganda channel, because he just wanted to hear what they were saying. And then he would tune into the Chichewa service of the same channel, and then he would listen to the BBC. And I would pay attention as a little girl, and I would also listen to his comments. But I also read a lot. So my dad had this trick. He had a study. And he used to hide chocolate bars in between books in his study because he wanted to encourage us to read. And do you know that my siblings for many, many years did not know that there were chocolate bars in the study? So I went to his study to get a book to read, and one bar fell out. And I ate it secretly, of course. I didn't tell anyone. So I'd go there every week. And every week I went there, out, of course, go there to look for chocolates. But then I ended up flipping through the books. And, you know, that's how I taught myself to read. And I took out, essentially just take any book and read it. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to be a broadcaster. And I felt that if I practiced reading, and I was encouraged to do that by my teachers at school, it would just perfect my skill in eloquence and presentation and confidence. So I would take any book. And of course, a journalist study would be filled with political books and books are about the profession. There wouldn't be anything for a 6 or 7 year old and beyond. But I would read that because I also felt, you know, maybe I was intelligent because I could read all that stuff. And so that spurred on my interest in international issues. And then I started reading the newspaper. So, because I would use that to practice reading the news. So reading the newspaper with a very naive mind, probably not even understanding what was in the newspaper, but using that as a test of presentation in front of the mirror. And because I did that so frequently, I started taking an interest in what was happening around the world. And listening to my father and taking part in discussions with him. And sometimes he'd take me, once he worked for the Zambia Information Services, and they went around the country to film and record cultural, political, whatever activities. And I would go along. And so there were so many factors that filled this little mind of mine, which just made me very interested in what was going on around me, asking a lot of questions, trying to find out what happens outside the world. And I always felt, when I grow up, I just want to go out and explore this world where my father goes to, because as a journalist, he traveled a lot. And he also worked at some time at State House on the media desk. So he got to travel a lot with the president. And so I just felt I want to do exactly what my father has done, or my father's doing. And I actually got to do it.
That's very remarkable. Now, there is a point that you've mentioned a lot about your father. You've mentioned about your father several times in the 20 minutes or 15 minutes we've spoken.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you've described him. He was a professional working, and most importantly, he left those chocolate bars in those books. I think I'm going to learn something, and I'll be doing that.
It's got to be a secret so that the children should discover them. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope my children are not watching this so that they know my little secret, but I'll try to do that. And so you've said a lot about your father. Is he still living? Is he passed on?
My father is late. He passed away in your video is freezing, so I don't know if you can hear me clearly. But anyway, my father passed away in January 2017, sadly, aged 82. And yes, I've said a lot about him because we started this conversation with a song from Serenge about Serenge culture, Serenge music, which is why my father got weaved into this discussion very easily. But obviously, there's the other side of me, which is my mother's side. Who actually played a fundamental role in my being who I am. I'm sure you've seen me proudly show photographs of her and I, and how much I resemble her, which I didn't understand when I was growing up. When people said she's a duplicate, I thought, what do they mean? But now as I grow older, I look in the mirror and I get terrified at how much I look like her, because I think I'm actually looking like her.
Like a Tumbuka mother.
Exactly. And not only do I look like her, but I've got similar characteristics and traits, my body language, the manner in which I speak to my children, and so many other aspects. So my mother was a very powerful woman, very powerful in the sense that she was not educated. She always wanted to be educated, but unfortunately her father decided to take her out of school when she was 15 years old and sold her off to, well, I call it sold her off because he wanted cows. And so he married her off to a man in Kalomo, and the man gave my grandfather a lot of cows, much to the disappointment of my mother. And she stayed in that marriage and left and went off, to the welfare society after some time, because she still wanted to get educated, but it was very difficult for her to go back into formal education after having been married and had 4 children. So she enrolled at what they used to call a fair, it means the welfare society. And the welfare society was what we would call a social service center, where they taught them various trades, home economics, cookery, skills, and so on. And there's a journalist who heard about her story and wanted to write about it. And that journalist turned out to be my dad. And that's how he married my mother. But she later became a very successful businesswoman, very driven. So she would always say to us, Ninkwata nabanje bati lemba quotation chinshi, later dictionary. In taking so she was self-taught. And through being semi-illiterate, she learned a lot and did exceptionally well in business, and she educated us and gave us a very comfortable, good life. So I have a lot of respect for my mother, and especially today, I talk a lot about the values that I learned from her about being independent yet being traditional, and also being a mother and a wife, but also being modern and sophisticated. And very empowering as well. So those are some of the qualities that you will see in me, in that by 18, I had my own job, because my mother had said to me, much as you'd want to get married and have children and find a husband who can provide for you, be an independent woman, have a job and earn your income. You don't expect a man to buy lotion for you. At 18, I had my first job and I was earning my own salary. And she was also a very glamorous woman. So I learned the art of glamour, cookery. So I must say that I'm very fortunate to have been born of those parents. Yeah.
Yeah. So and then your siblings. So between your mom and your dad, and then you have your siblings. You are the firstborn.
Yes, I'm the firstborn. The secondborn was a brother called Peter, who passed away in 2018. And then there's Martha, who's probably watching this show tonight. Martha, my lookalike sister. And then unfortunately, Grace also passed away. And then the youngest is Mumba.
All right.
That's the baby of the family, yes.
Now, there is all this combination of the heritage you get from your dad, the heritage you get from your mom, the hard work, and the combination of both modern and traditional, and you're calling it glamour and everything else. That's very tough to navigate all that at the same time. How have you managed?
Difficult. Yeah, it's very difficult. It's very tough because you see, you've got to be centered and grounded. And I think for me, that is sort of what has been one of the biggest challenges of my life. Essentially, is first of all, being grounded. Who am I and what is my identity? So you see, Vamusha, I left Zambia when I was 24 years old. And as a young expatriate, I was headhunted to work for a television station in South Africa.
No. I need to say something before you go there. Yeah. You see, if you say that you left Zambia at 24 years old, now there is this thing, right? When you are appearing on TV and you're becoming famous, I think society thinks that you are far older than your age. And so it's unbelievable when you say that you actually left and became an expatriate at 24. To some of us, and that were looking up to those and listening to you read the news, we thought you were old. You were very old.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because a lot of people used to refer to me as Maureen Nkandu. And today I see 25-year-olds who say Maureen Nkandu. And I'm like, Wanjishibire Kwisaiwe. No, Kutamba TV. I said Iwe, 25 years old. So I was petite, and it was pretty obvious that I was quite young. But it's interesting that, I mean, because you spend time there, the assumption is that for you to be on that television, you should have gone through several years of, maybe having gone to university and so on for 5-6 years, and then finally gone on to TV and so on. I started television I finished high school age 17. I had a bit of a gap here and then went to TV. My dad enrolled me at the University of Zambia. I spent maybe 1 month there, and I said it was totally boring. I didn't want to be there. He tried to put me at the Evelyn Hon College, and I said, this is not what I want. I just want to be on TV. And I left. And I secretly went to ZNBC and got the job. And I was working behind, because back then you wouldn't go on TV right away. You'd have to be trained for about 6 months before you would appear, we had very good training. And I give a lot of credit to my achievements to the foundation that I got at ZNBC. It was called ZBS when I joined in 1986. So my parents, it took a while for them to actually know that I was working. They'll tell them I'm going to the library. And then I'd record schools broadcasts and maybe some announcements on TV. And then because my mother always spoke Nyanja. So I would knock off maybe 16:30 and go back home and then sit in front of the TV with, family time back then. And my mother would say, Nkandu, wavela uyu amenakamba pa TV uyu. Kumaziwi yake yaparana na mwana watu uyu. Mwavela Nkandu. Mvelani. I think Amonga Mumbi, because Mumbi is my other name. And then they'll say, Bapalana, but Deo,
What?
And they were shocked to find out that it was actually me. But I was terrified. I thought, what are they going to say? I dropped out of university and college to do this job. But anyway, eventually later on, I did go back. I did go to university and college. But I want to just go back to your question about, you've got all these dimensions to your background. Tumbuka, Lala, traveled here, there. So, and you were saying, is that easy? It's been easy, but it's also been difficult. But one of the things that has been very good for me, and the reason I started talking about having left the country to work as an expatriate, is when you're outside your country, and I'm sure you've had that experience, Bamusha, I won't call you Dr. Musha, is that that is when you actually realize your identity becomes stronger, because you come across people, and I have been privileged to meet people from all over the world. I've done most of my journalistic training has been outside Zambia. I'd go to schools in Holland, Denmark, and all sorts of countries, India, and I'd meet, a diverse group of people from Uganda, from Latin America, from other countries in Africa and Asia and so on. And they would each talk about where they come from. And that's where your sense of identity comes out, because then you take it for granted when you're in Zambia. And remember, we grew up in a Zambia where we had one tribe, which was Zambian. And so you go out there and then you realize, oh, goodness, so they're Mexican. They're from, Lithuania. They're from Estonia. They're Russian. I am Zambian. So I would say I'm Zambian, and this is what it is about me. This is my identity. I come from this part of Zambia. So you gain that sense of identity, and you want to start searching more about yourself so that you actually stand out. And I know that, some people may argue that the people who go and live abroad and tend to pick on the culture of the society in which they live, which is probably all right. But I made that deliberate decision to not lose that Zambianness in me. I picked up several accents as I traveled around the world in the different countries, and still maintained my language. I can still speak it. I speak a bit of Tumbuka. But then it was also, it's what makes me a rich person in that sense, in that I can sort of fit into any society within my country because I'm quite grounded. We visited the village quite a lot when I was young, but also my parents were modernists.
And by village, you mean Kwakanona?
Okay?
By village, you mean Kwakanona?
Yes, Kukanona. You don't say Kwakanona, you say Kukanona. So our area is Kukanona, and then our chiefdom, because I come from the royal family, I'm from both Chief Serenje, who's in an area called Mpepetwe, and Chief Mailo in Kanona. So, yeah, so we would go because our village is in between Mpepetwe and Kanona. And my mother wanted to ensure that I had, and my siblings had, that village grounding at an early age. So we had a very modern lifestyle in Lusaka, and my parents were socialites. So they would entertain, they would be amongst diplomats and expatriates and government officials. And that's not what my mother wanted us to be, especially me, because I was a bit of the pampered child by my dad. We were a big family. I told you we were 5, but we had other siblings. So we had a big family. So there were responsibilities in the house, who's going to cook. And we'd have 2 people on cooking duty. You cook for the men in the kitchen. You cook for the women, panse pambabula, because we were many. And I didn't want to do those chores. And I would say, homework I would have to do my homework. And my father would say, homework. And my mother would say, no. ala unaiko mwana. So her trick was, okay, ukamona. So they would bundle me into the car and say, Tulea Kumushi, and would visit the village, and I'd be very happy. And then I remember the first day they left me there alone. My parents said, oh, to Ayapama shops, and off they went. They went to Lusaka. I think I was about 9 years old. And evening came, I asked my grandparents, what time am I mean, my grandmother that time, what time are my parents coming back? And she said, and it was nighttime, and I started crying, and I said, and there's no television, and I just really cried, because previously we'd go and visit and then, drive back to Lusaka. And I had the protection of my mom, there collecting water and so on. But my mom left me there deliberately because she wanted me to learn the skills. And she had left instructions that I should chop firewood, I should grind the millet. In Lala, we call it ukupela male. I should go to the river and collect water, and I should do everything that a girl of my age is supposed to do in the village. And it was torture for me at first. I preferred to spend more time with the boys, making wire cars and driving around and so on. And my aunt would say, Nkokolo polawe, which in Lala means I'm going to give you a spanking, katemenkuni. And I said, I'll report you to my dad, you're abusing me. But eventually, after spending about 2 weeks there, I liked it and I got into the rhythm of it. And when I came of age, I was taken back to the village and spent time there. So, back then when you're growing up, you'd think this is really village primitive life and I don't like it. But as you grow older and you travel around the world and you realize there's certain aspects of you and your identity and your culture and your upbringing that are so valuable that you can share with others, you actually feel very proud to talk about it. And I've written a bit about this in my book. And you also find that that's where your richness comes in, because you're able then to balance the global world in which we live with that of your traditional essence and who you really are. And I always say Kwesukuilala because I had that encounter from early childhood. And now as I grow older, I see the value of our food, the manner in which we speak, the manner in which we relate to each other and to others and so on. And I'm always very happy to share that.
Your life has been definitely very diverse and long, right? And so there is so much. It's like a spectrum, and you can pick at several things. You even tell your story in your book. Would you care to share with our audience the title of the book and where it can be found?
Yes. Well, my book is titled "Tried and Tested: My First 50 Years," and I published this book in June 2017 when I turned 50. It was written kind of hurriedly because I'd wanted to finalize it and finish it so that my dad could read it.
So you've already given out very important piece of the information that you should then be about.
I'm 54. Well, I don't make any secrets about it because
54, but if you want,
may your cows be many and may your goats be many and may you be wealthy for that compliment. Yeah. So anyway, so essentially that book, it's run out. It was one of the best-selling books in Zambia when it was published. There was demand for it because there were a lot of bits and pieces. Essentially, it was about my life in 50 years, summarized in a few hundred pages. And it talks about my early childhood. It talks about my, teenage years. It also talks about my career, my professional experience, my personal life. And there were bits that I know a lot. It talks about Kalusha Bwalia, yes. And it talks about my relationship with him and the so-called colored baby and all the rumors that went around. And I wouldn't want to, of course, those were lies. And of course, you see, for me, the interesting thing is that I experienced what some people are going through today at a very early age. Public interest in your personal life. When I was very young, I was just a teenager.
And cyberbullying. Can we call it cyberbullying? What you experienced?
Cyberbullying is when, I wouldn't call it cyberbullying. I would just call it just people being interested in you. They don't know much about you, and there are people who want to show that they know about you, so they'll make up stories.
So there was no kind of thing.
No, there wasn't. And I've got the pictures and everything in the book. And I tell the story of what happened from beginning to the end and how people converged at the hospital when they heard I was going to have a baby, because they wanted to see what sort of a baby it was. And so if it was in this day and age of social media, you would sort of dispel those rumors very easily. But back then it wasn't. And being the youngest person on television and also being quite popular, the rumors spread like wildfire. But that's not the only aspect of my book. But obviously Zambians wanting to read a bit of that gossipy aspect liked that book for that, and I don't blame them for it. It was my opportunity to tell the story. But it also talks about, the other side of me. So, there's a tough side of me because I've covered civil war and conflict in very difficult circumstances. I've been arrested, I've been kidnapped. And I also just wanted to show that aspect of my life because that is a lived experience, and which is why I can very confidently speak about various aspects of journalism, because I started as what we used to call a continuity announcer, to being a newsreader, to being a reporter, to being a seasoned presenter on an international television platform, to then going into the field and getting into territory that is for tough Western international media, as an African woman who's a mother and a wife, telling the story from an African perspective and fighting and jostling to tell that story, which was actually one of the most difficult experiences of my life. And I specialized in reporting on the civil war and conflict in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where I was even arrested at one time and thrown into jail and so on. So the book talks about those aspects. It talks about my family life, about my siblings, about my parents, and sadly up to the point when my father died.
Oh.
And of course, earlier on also talks about my mother passing away.
Right. So that's tried and tested, and you say that it's already sold out, so there's nowhere to get it.
So what is happening is the book is available on Amazon. We just need to check what's been happening, because I've been getting reports that people can't get it anymore. So I need to check with Amazon Books online. And we are in the process of publishing new copies. So pretty soon, before end of this year, we should have it back in the bookstores. It was being sold at Book World and Grey Matter, on the Copperbelt and in Lusaka, and we also sent it around to Livingston and so on. But because there's so much demand for it, we're trying to get more copies published. We did the first 5,000, and they all just sold out very quickly.
All right. So I know that we wished we had a lot more time. Like everybody, I'm monitoring the comments here, and they want to have a whole day with you, Maureen.
Well, I'd love
to listen to you for the whole day or something like that. So
I can give you an extra 10 minutes.
Right.
I told you earlier, there's an important news and current affairs program I never miss at 10 o'clock on BBC World Service. So I could give you another 10, 15 minutes, but I've got to tune in at 10 o'clock for News Hour.
All right. No problem. Thank you. Now, you've told us all this, and that's good. So I want us to go to now. What sort of projects are you involved in? What defines your work and your contribution to our country?
That is very, very important. Thank you for that question. So at the moment, I work for WaterAid, which is an international charity organization that looks at aspects of water and sanitation. I'm the regional communications manager for Southern Africa, which is I have oversight for communications in 6 countries in Southern Africa where WaterAid operates. But I'm now emphasizing into doing what I'm very passionate about. And you may have noticed that earlier this week, we announced the launch of the FM Nkandu Media Institute, which is a training institute that is based in Lusaka that will be starting in February. And essentially, I just identified the need for us to train journalists better in Zambia. The reason it's named after my father is because he dedicated a great deal of his life training journalists. And there are very few that would say have not been under his hand, as we would say in English, not only from Zambia, but even in the region. Because remember, Zambia, during the liberation struggle of Southern Africa, housed a number of liberation movements. So journalists from South Africa who worked for Radio Freedom, and from Namibia and from Tanzania and so on were based in Zambia. But beyond that, we had the African Literature Center in Kitwe, which is a very good, I don't know if it still is today, but I know was a very good journalism training center. My father studied there in the 1960s, but also trained there. Kumindolo, yes. And then he also trained at the Evelyn Hon College, and he joined with others and formed the Nkandu Jin College. So we just felt that in honor of the work that he did and a continuation of the impartation of journalism to Zambians, especially young Zambians, we should name it in his honor. But significantly, we've seen a plethora of radio and television stations in Zambia, which is very good. It's a sign of, opening up of democratic spaces. But what is the quality that we're bringing out of there? And I used to hear people say to me, "Oh, when are you forming your own TV station?" And I said, that's far from it. I'm more interested in bringing out the substance. And it's no use me blurping each and every day about what I see on ZNBC and other platforms saying, that's not good and you shouldn't do that. And the question comes back to me, well, what are you doing about it? I have spent quite a bit of time coming to Zambia and doing training of journalists, sometimes at ZNBC and, sometimes, other media organizations, but that's not adequate. And I felt that we needed to have this sustainable media institution. Our first courses are going to be 6-month courses, starting from February to July, and just a week after that, another one from July to December. And we are more interested in having young girls, young women enroll, because journalism is not just about what you do. It's about empowerment. It's about various aspects of society. It's the fourth estate, as you know, so it's very powerful. And in the interest of women empowerment, I also feel that we need to empower women more to tell the Zambian story better. What are the sort of stories we're telling today? Media is highly politicized. It's polarized. It's towards this political party and the other. And we saw a lot of this in the previous election. The politicians are many, but journalists have got the power to set the news agenda. And if you are a weak media, you will be politicized. There's so many other socio-economic stories in Zambia that need to be told. Yes, everything is tied around politics, but today, even buying packet ya sugar pakantemba is political, because that is how the society has been. And what role has media played in allowing that? Where our media ethics, where journalists sell out for, media is bought out. There's a saying, he who pays the piper calls the tune. But then you throw away your ethics for financial support, for advertisements, for commercials. So we need to instill some of those good old-fashioned journalistic ethics, but in the modern context of the global world that we live in today. And, in the fast-evolving, dynamic society that Zambia is. And that is why we feel that it's important that we establish this media institution. Of course, there will be young men welcome as well. They'll be mostly entry-level. You can start with a grade 12 certificate.
They're most welcome. That is going to apply, and I hope that he'll be accepted. Very brilliant. So we've already got that.
Our website is going to go live tomorrow. It's www.fmnkandumediainstitute.com, but we'll publicize all that. And of course, you can apply and fill in an application form, and all the information on what you should do is there, and we'll guide you along. And we're also going to give a few scholarships. Especially, we do not want to marginalize those who cannot afford to pay the fees. The fees are quite minimal, but we also want to look at those who are in disadvantaged communities, in rural areas, who may not have the opportunity to go to university and study journalism, to come to our training, which is going to be very practical. There'll be an aspect of theory to it, but it's essentially, this is how you do the job. If you're court reporting, if you're reporting on an election, if you're publishing a newspaper or an online magazine, this is how you do it. There'll be attachments to institution. We'll be sending journalists to parliament to report on what's happening. So it will be very practical training. And hoping that they'll have good enough skills for them to be able to get jobs, but also those who are qualified journalists are also welcome to apply, to relearn, because there's need for a lot of relearning as far as journalism is concerned in Zambia.
You mentioned a little bit about Nkandu Jin, and I think your father was very instrumental in that institution, and it has trained surprisingly
a lot of journalists.
I think it came at a time when there was, the time of liberalization and looking at private institutions played a huge role. Is that institution still in existence?
No, unfortunately not. I do not have much detail about it, but I know that my dad trained there well into his late 70s, and we felt as a family that it was quite hectic for him. He was passionate. He didn't want to stop because he always said, I'll die with a pen in my hand, which is a very journalistic phrase to say, I'll die doing what I'm passionate about. And so he sort of faded away from it, and it was left to others to run. And I understand it's no longer in existence. And I do not have much detail about it. But what I do know is, as you have said, a lot of people were trained. And I'm actually amazed at how many people write to me and say, I was your father's student at Jin. He had expertise in press law. His first career, my dad, was that of a police officer. And then he later trained law at Lilai and sort of moved into journalism and other aspects. So you see, he was very solid. Press law and various aspects. I was a student of his. I was a lifetime student because he started training me possibly from the day I was born. Everything I know about this profession, I was taught by my father, such that even when I went to learning institutions, I was quite solid. Of course, learning does not stop, but I was privileged to be taught almost every day. And we used to have a fantastic time just discussing various aspects of this noble profession.
What a great tribute to your father, and you opening up this institute in his memory, and we hope that you're going to get the students and continue with that influence and impact. That will be great. So
Yeah.
you work for WaterAid. You're involved with the institute. And WaterAid, you say that you are taking care of several countries.
That's right. So it's oversight of communications in 6 countries in Southern Africa. So it's essentially all aspects of communications, communications for advocacy, for fundraising. It's showcasing the impact of what WaterAid is doing. Of course, I'm the spokesperson, but I'm not here to speak in my official capacity about WaterAid. But it's very important that we pay attention to what WaterAid does because, especially in the COVID-19 pandemic, an essential aspect of staying safe against the pandemic, against infection, is having access to water to wash your hands. Now, we cannot tell people to wash their hands when they do not have access to water. I've been in Lusaka for several months now, and 3 out of, maybe sometimes 4 out of 7 days, we don't have water. We're lucky that we store water elsewhere. Now imagine communities that cannot have water. What about sanitation? What about basic hygiene? So those are the main aspects that WaterAid does. And it's ensuring that government dedicates policy commitment, but not only government. What about the private sector, philanthropies, international organizations, committing to ensuring that communities have access to water, sanitation, and hygiene. And now there's also the element of climate change and how that's impacting on sanitation. So I'm responsible for communications on those aspects and supporting the different country programs around the communications and advocacy work that they do. But I also want to mention that I've also had a very interesting career doing communications for the United Nations Development Program. Again, it was a very regional position looking at East and Southern Africa. I was responsible for 23 countries. The African Union through the NEPAD Development Agency, as you know, that's the development arm of the African Union. And not too long ago, I was also with the African Union mission to the United States of America in Washington, D.C. So I find those aspects very profound. And these are some of the things I want to now plow back into my country, because this is very diverse experience. And I feel that it's not just about journalism, it's also about different aspects of policy formulation, gender issues, developmental aspects, sustainable development, and different, and if there was an opportunity also to provide the advice and guidance to government institutions, I'd be very happy to do that.
You were recently appointed to the to the board of KaSanka.
Yes, KaSanka Trust, yes.
Which is one of the oldest private trusts that takes care of our lands there in Lalaland. And even if it's Lalaland, it's also Ushiland, because we are very close, right? We are very close.
It's Bangweulu. Yes.
It's the Bangweulu things. And so one of the observations I made when I visited Milenge the second time in the early 2000s was the stories that we were being told about Milenge, where my father and my mother's family grew up, was that Milenge was different. Wildlife, there was no wildlife. Fish depleted, and so it's a very different world. But the KaSanka Trust is one of those old trusts that are there to see that our way of life is preserved to as much as possible, and to protect animals.
That's right. No, I agree, and I will interfere there because there are a lot of challenges. Obviously, there's encroachment and other aspects that are under litigation now that I cannot speak about. But essentially, the trust wants to preserve the ecosystem of the area. You may know that that's where you get the largest convergence of bats in the world at a given time. Millions and millions of bats come together. They migrate probably from somewhere in West Africa towards the Congo Basin onto that particular area in KaSanka. From about October, this is peak bat viewing time. It's a tourist spectacle. And so these are some of the aspects that the trust is quite keen on, ensuring that we grow the tourism, we ensure that the animals, the flora and fauna is back there and enriched, and that there are no prevailing commercial interests that are going to affect the ecosystem and also impact badly, negatively on the community, because there's a lot of work that the trust is doing in empowering the community in terms of beekeeping, in terms of, artifacts and crafts and other trades. And so if there are heavy commercial interests, then it just takes away some of the efforts that we're trying to achieve. And so for me, it was really a great honor to be appointed to the board because, one, I'm from that area. I'm passionate about tourism and wildlife, but also in just giving back to the community. You may know or not that I also run a little cooperative of women in my village in Serenje called the Kawombe Women's Cooperative. Kawombe is derived from the Kawombe River that runs across our land in Serenje. So essentially, this is a group of women. It's still starting and sort of struggling on, but we will pick up. And it's around promoting menstrual health hygiene. Women there are in a very difficult situation. They don't earn an income. And they go through this menstrual cycle, which is actually, it should be a national priority. If we can give free condoms in toilets, let us give free sanitary pad sanitation to women. They use leaves and newspapers and cow dung and so on to protect themselves. So there's a little scheme that I'm doing for women to just make these feminine towels themselves and be able to sell them, but also basic home economics. If you belong to Ichilimba, how well can you utilize your money? How can you empower yourself so that you don't wait for bamushanga bafuma sundown tomato tapapo tupeniko tomato, things like that. Anyway, I was just giving that an example. So it's traditional empowerment of women that they're able to just run their own chickens and grow their crops and feel that they are worth it. They can make a little bit of money from their trades rather than wait for their husbands, who are mostly just peasant laborers, to earn some income and be able to provide for them.
Maureen, at 54, it means you are almost in the top 1% of the agents, and unfortunately, because of our population, it's pretty young.
Yeah, we've got a very youthful population.
How would you like Zambia to remember you? I know you're very young. At 54, you are young, but
how would I like Zambia to remember me? Goodness, I've never thought about it. I'd normally say any which way you like. Really, there ever was such a phrase. Any which way you like. I think I'm just getting started. Remember, this is the second half of my life. You never know what I would be remembered as. I mean, there's so much women empowerment. I might be remembered as a leader of the country one day, or a leader of a tribe, or a chief, or you never know. So it's too early to say.
President Maureen Nkandu, Her Excellency the President of the Republic of Zambia.
Chinga chitika, as we say in Lala. Who says it can't happen? Anyway, so yeah, seriously, I think it's just, it's difficult to say how you'd want people to remember you. I mean, you'd want people to remember in a certain way, but people have got various perspectives. But I know that I'm a journalist and I'm very passionate about it. I'm passionate about my identity. I'm passionate about my country. And I've often said, I've been asked that question and I've said, well, I don't know if it's grammatical, but anyway, which way you like, really.
That's daring. Maureen, TVBAKWETU is web-based. We are actually just Facebook-based. And we rebranded as TVBAKWETU very recently, of course.
You've done very well. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. We played that role during the elections, and here we are. And so we grow by subscription. And so we encourage our viewers to subscribe, particularly the diaspora, because what we are telling them is this is content from home.
Yes.
Because Zambia, you come to TVBAKWETU, and here we are hosting Maureen, who has a lot of stories about Lala, Tumbuka, journalism, KaSanka Trust, and everything else. And
the world. I'm very well-rounded, yeah.
Yeah, so subscribe to TVBAKWETU and be part of us. There are several comments, Maureen, before you go. I just want to go over some of them. Mwaka Nanyango is saying that Linda Banks, I thought you were Maureen Nkandu. So we do have a co-host here and presenter on TVBAKWETU. Her name is Linda. Unfortunately, she's not here with us today, but she would look forward to speaking with you. And I think she also got some journalism training from your father. And so they say, most of our viewers are saying that you resemble her a lot.
Oh, she resembles me because I'm probably older.
Yeah. Oh, yes. So okay. So resemblance has everything to do with age, Jane.
Oh, perhaps not. It's just my way of thinking.
Yeah, thank you. So that's Linda Banks, and Mwaka Nanyango was able to pick that up.
I just want to say also very quickly about this Media Institute that we are bringing in a caliber of trainers that is very, very, very high level. So having worked all around the world, I've got people who are volunteering, my former colleagues at the BBC, at Al Jazeera, South African television, but also importantly here in Zambia, will be there to give world-class journalism. And so I'm very, very excited about this project. And I'm so glad that we had this opportunity to talk about this. Of course, there's a lot that I can talk about my life. And time would not allow. I need to go and listen to my news and current affairs program, which I listen to as an absolute must. So it's been wonderful being here. And I know I interjected. You probably wanted to say something, but I just wanted to say what a pleasure being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Maureen, for joining us today. So this has been Maureen Nkandu on TVBAKWETU. Thank you. We have our TVBAKWETU friends here. They can wave and say hello. And we're going to bring you back, Maureen, soon so that you can continue telling us a story. Thank you very much for joining us today. This has been a presentation of TVBAKWETU with Maureen Nkandu. God bless you and God bless our country. Thank you, Maureen.
Thank you. God bless you too. How do you exit these models?
All right. So this is what we are going to do. We are going to, because we want the Maureen Nkandu interview to be on its own. So we're going to transition to another program to be hosted by one of my colleagues. So Kelabai, we've got to say good night now and then restart the program. I hope that we're going to get as many people as possible to follow us, so that at least we can keep the Maureen Nkandu interview intact.
Yes.
All right. Let's do that. Thank you. Thank you. This has been TVBAKWETU presentation. Good night.